Welcome back, everybody. Today we will be reading Chapter 6, so let's get into it. Citadel Control says we are cleared for landing, came the helmsman's voice over the shipboard intercom. ETA to docking, 17 minutes. Through the Hastings primary viewport, Anderson could see the Citadel in the distance, the magnificent space station that served as the cultural, economic, and political center of the galaxy. From here, several thousand kilometers away, it resembled a five-pointed star, a quintet of long, thick arms extending out from a hollow central ring. Though he'd seen it many times before, Anderson still marveled at its sheer size. The middle ring was 10 kilometers in diameter. Each arm was 25 kilometers long and 5 kilometers in breadth. In the 2,700 years since the Council was established on the Citadel, great cosmopolitan metropolises, known as the wards, had been constructed along each arm, entire cities built into the station's multi-level interior. 40 million people from every species and sector across the known galaxy now made their homes there. There was, quite simply, no other station to compare it to. Even Arcturus would be dwarfed in its presence. But it wasn't just its size that made it so amazing. Like the mass relays, the Citadel had originally been created by the Protheans. Its hull was formed of the same virtually indestructible material used to construct the mass relays, a technological feat no other species had equaled since the Protheans' mysterious extinction 50,000 years ago. Even with the most advanced weaponry, it would take days of steady, concentrated bombardment to do any significant damage to the hull. Not that anyone would ever consider attacking the Citadel. The station was located at the heart of a major mass relay junction deep inside a dense nebula cloud. This gave it several natural defenses. The nebula was difficult to navigate. It would slow any enemy fleets and make it difficult for them to launch any sort of organized attack. And with several dozen mass relays in the vicinity, reinforcements from virtually every region of the galaxy were only minutes away. If anyone did penetrate these exterior defenses, the station's long arms could fold up around the central ring, drawing together to transform the Citadel from a five-armed star into a long cylindrical tube. Once the arms were closed, the station was all but impregnable. The final layer of protection was provided by the Citadel fleet, a joint force of Turian, Solarian, and Asari vessels that was always on patrol in the vicinity. It only took Anderson a few seconds to pick out the flagship, the Destiny Ascension. An Asari dreadnought, the Ascension was more than just a majestic symbol of the Citadel's power, 4 times the size of anything in the human fleet, and with a crew approaching 5,000. The Destiny Ascension was the most formidable warship ever constructed. Like the Citadel itself, it was without peer. Of course, the ships of the Council fleet were not the only vessels in the area. The Serpent Nebula was the nexus of the galaxy's mass relay network. All roads eventually led to the Citadel. Traffic here was constant and crowded. This was one of the few places in all the galaxy where there was a real threat of crashing into another vessel. Congestion was particularly heavy at the free-floating discharge stations. Generating the mass effect fields necessary to run the FTL speeds caused a powerful charge to build up inside a ship's drive core. Left unchecked, the core would oversaturate, resulting in a massive energy burst being released through the hull. A burst powerful enough to cook anyone on board who wasn't properly grounded, burn out all electronic systems, and even fuse the metal bulkheads. To prevent such a calamity, most ships were required to discharge their drive cores every 20 to 30 hours. Typically, this was done by grounding on a planet or dispersing the buildup through close proximity to the magnetic field of a larger stellar body, such as a sun or gas giant. However, there were no astrological bodies of sufficient size in the nearby vicinity of the Citadel, Instead, a ring of specially designed docking stations allowed ships to link in and release the energy in their drive cores before continuing on using conventional sub-FTL drives. Fortunately, the Hastings had discharged her core when she'd first arrived in the region over an hour ago. Since then, she'd been on a holding pattern, patiently waiting for the clearance they had only just now received. Anderson didn't need to worry about the crew's performance on a routine approach like this. They'd done it hundreds of times before. Instead, he just shut his mind off and enjoyed the view as the Citadel drew slowly closer, looming ever larger in the viewpoint. The lights from the wards twinkled and shone, their piercing illumination a counterpoint to the hazy, swirling brightness of the nebula cloud that served as the backdrop to the scene. It's beautiful. Anderson jumped, startled by the voice coming from right behind him. Gunnery Chief Daw laughed. "Sorry, Lieutenant. Didn't mean to scare you." Anderson glanced down at the bandages and walking brace that encased her leg from the upper thigh all the way down to her ankle. "You're getting pretty good on that thing, Chief. I didn't even hear you sneaking up on me." She shrugged. "Medic said I'm going to make a complete recovery. I owe you one." "That's not how it works," Anderson replied with a smile. "I know you'd have done the same for me." "I like to think so, sir, but thinking it and doing it aren't the same, so thanks." "Don't tell me you came all the way up here from the infirmary just to thank me." She grinned. "Actually, I came to see if you'd give me another piggyback ride." "Forget it," Anderson replied with a laugh. "I nearly threw my back out hauling your ass out of there. You really need to shed a few pounds." "Careful, sir," she warned, lifting her braced leg an inch off the floor. "I can deliver a pretty good kick with this thing." Anderson turned back to the viewpoint, grinning. "Just shut up and enjoy the view, Daw. That's an order." "Yes, sir." It only took a few minutes for Anderson to clear customs after they landed. They had touched down at an Alliance port, and military personnel were given top priority whenever they came in from a mission. The Citadel security officers checked his Alliance ID and verified it by scanning his thumbprint. Then gave a cursory check of the pack carrying his personal belongings before waving him through. Anderson was pleased to see they were both human. Last month, there had still been a few Solarian officers assigned to the Alliance ports due to species staff shortages. CSEC had promised to recruit more humans into their ranks. It looked like they'd been true to their word. Leaving the ports behind, he stepped into the elevator that would bring him up to the main level. He yawned once. Now that was off-duty, the fatigue he'd been holding at bay during the entire mission began to wash over him. He couldn't wait to get back to his private residence in the wards. Considering how much time he'd spent on patrol, it could be argued that paying rent for an apartment on the Citadel was an extravagant expense, but he felt it was important to have a place he could call his own, even if he was only home 1 week out of 4. The elevator stopped, the doors opened, and Anderson stepped out into the pandemonium of light and sound that was the wards. Throngs of people filled the pedways. Individuals of every species, coming and going in all directions. Rapid transit cars zoomed by overhead on the monorail, each one filled with commuters, students, and general gawkers taking the high-speed tour. The lower streets were packed with smaller ground transport vehicles weaving in and out of the designated thoroughfares, each driver in more of a hurry than the last. It was always rush hour on the Citadel. Fortunately, he didn't need to flag a driver down or head to a transit shop. His apartment was only 20 minutes away by foot, so he simply hiked his gear up over his shoulder and fell in with the mob, jostling and shoving with the rest of the maddening crowds. As he walked, his senses were under constant assault from an endless stream of electronic advertisements. Everywhere he looked, there were flashing holographic images, Futuristic billboards promoting 1,000 different companies on 100 different worlds. Food, beverages, vehicles, clothes, entertainment. On the Citadel, everything was available for purchase. However, only a handful of the ads were geared specifically to humans. They were still a minority on the station, and corporations preferred to spend their advertising dollars on species with a larger market share. But with each passing month, Anderson noticed more and more of his own kind among the hustling and bustling masses. Anderson knew that it was important for humans to integrate themselves with the rest of the interstellar community. What better place to do it than the Citadel, where all the disparate cultures in Citadel space were on display? That was the real reason Anderson kept his apartment in the wards. He wanted to understand the other species, and the quickest way to do that was to live among them. He reached his building, pausing at the main door to speak his name so the voice recognition system would let him in. His apartment was on the second level, so he eschewed the elevator and lugged his pack up the staircase. At the door to his personal quarters, he again gave his name, then staggered into the room and dropped his gear in the center of the floor. He was too tired to turn on the lights as he made his way through the small kitchen to the single bedroom at the back, barely registering the faint whoosh as the apartment door automatically closed behind him. When he reached the bedroom, he didn't even bother to undress. He simply collapsed on the bed, exhausted but glad to be home. Anderson woke several hours later. Night and day meant little in the perpetual activity of the Citadel, but when he rolled over to check the clock by his bed, the digital readout said 1700. On human colonies and out on patrol, the Alliance still used the familiar 24-hour clock based on Terran Coordinated Universal Time, the protocol established in the late 20th century to replace the archaic Greenwich Mean Time system. On the Citadel, however, everything operated on the galactic standard of a 20-hour day. To further complicate things, each hour was divided into 100 minutes of 100 seconds, but each second was roughly half as long as the ones humans were used to. The net result was that the 24-hour galactic standard day was about 15% longer than the 24-hour day as calculated by Terran Coordinated Universal Time. Just thinking about it made Anderson's head hurt, and it played havoc with his sleep patterns. This was to be expected, given that he'd been pre-conditioned by several million years of Terran evolution. 3 more hours and the day would roll into tomorrow, when he was supposed to present himself to the ambassador for a debriefing on Sidon. He didn't have to be there until 10, however, which meant that he had plenty of time to kill. He'd probably need to catch a few more hours of sleep before the meeting, but he wasn't tired now. So Anderson rolled out of bed, shed his clothes, and tossed them into the small laundry machine. He had a quick shower, changed into fresh clothes, civvies, then logged in onto his data terminal to check for news updates and messages. Communication across an entire galaxy was no simple matter. Ships could use Mass Effect drives to exceed the speed of light, but signals transmitted through the cold vacuum of space by conventional means would still take years to travel from one solar system to another. Transferring information, personal messages, or even raw data across thousands of light years expediently could only be accomplished in one of 2 ways. Files could be transported by courier drones, unmanned ships programmed to travel through the mass relay network by the most direct routes possible. But courier drones weren't cheap to produce or operate. Fuel was expensive. And if they had to pass through several relays, it could take hours for them to arrive at their destination. The solution wasn't practical for back-and-forth communications. The other option was to transmit data via the extranet, a series of buoys placed across the galaxy that were specifically designed to enable real-time communication between systems. Information could be sent by a conventional radio signal to the nearest array of communication buoys. The buoys were telemetrically aligned with a similar array hundreds or even thousands of light years away, connected by the tight beam projection of a Mass Effect field, the space-age equivalent of the fiber optic cables used on Earth in the late 20th century. Within this narrow corridor, signals could be projected several thousand times faster than the speed of light. Data in the form of radio signals could be relayed from one array to the next virtually instantaneously. Once the arrays were properly aligned, it was even possible to speak to someone on the opposite end of the galaxy with a lag of only a few tenths of a second. However, while the extranet's buoy arrays made communication possible, it still wasn't exactly feasible for the vast majority. Trillions of people on thousands of worlds were accessing the extranet every second of every day, overloading the finite bandwidth capabilities of the comm arrays. To accommodate this, information was sent in carefully measured bursts of data in space, and each burst was parceled out in a highly regulated priority system. Top priority in each burst was given to organizations directly responsible for perceiving galactic security. Next came the various official governments and militaries for each and every species in Council space, then the assorted media conglomerates. Anything left over was parceled off and sold to the highest bidder. Virtually all of the unused space on every burst was purchased by extranet provider corporations, who then divided their allocated space into thousands of tiny packages that were resold to individual subscribers. Depending on the provider and how much an individual was willing to pay, it was possible to get personal updates from hourly, daily, or even weekly bursts. Not that Anderson had to be concerned about any of that. As an Alliance officer, his private extranet account received official bursts every 15 minutes. Piggybacking personal messages onto the official bursts was one of the perks of his rank. There was only one message waiting for him in his inbox. He frowned, recognizing the sender's address. It wasn't exactly a surprise, but he wasn't happy to see the file. For a second, he considered ignoring it. But he knew he was being childish. Better to just get it over with. He opened the file, downloading a series of eDocs and a short pre-recorded video message from the divorce attorney. Jesus. An image of Ib Haman, his lawyer, appeared on the terminal screen as the video began to play. Ib was a portly, balding man in his 60s. He was wearing an expensive-looking suit and was seated behind his desk in an office Anderson had become all too familiar with over the last year. "Lieutenant, I won't bother you with the formality of asking how you're doing. I know this hasn't been easy for you or Cynthia." "Damn right," Anderson muttered under his breath as the message continued. "I've sent you copies of all the documents I had you sign the last time we met. Cynthia's signed them now, too." The man on the screen glanced down and shifted some papers on the desk in front of him, then looked back up at the camera. "You'll also see a copy of my fee. I know this isn't much consolation right now, but just be glad you two didn't have any children. It could have been a lot worse, and a lot more expensive. When custody becomes an issue, the proceedings rarely go this smoothly." Anderson snorted. Nothing about this mess had felt smooth to him. "The marriage will be officially absolved on the date indicated in the documents. I suspect that by the time you get this message, your divorce will be final. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, Lieutenant. And if you ever need me for..." The message terminated abruptly as Anderson deleted it and dragged it into the trash. He hadn't planned on ever talking to Ib Haman again. The man was a good attorney. His prices were reasonable, and he'd been fair and unbiased throughout the divorce. In fact, he'd been nothing but the model of efficiency and professionalism. And if he was standing in the apartment right now, Anderson would have punched him in the face. It was a funny thing, Anderson thought as he shut the terminal down. He'd just participated in two of humanity's oldest, most enduring customs, marriage and divorce. Now it was time for an even older tradition. He was going to the bar to get drunk. That's it for Chapter 6. We'll see you guys next time with Chapter 7.